I'm on the job. Need medical attention? Did someone page me?
Let's move. Standing by. Let's move. Give me something to shoot. Let's move. Let's move. Give me something to shoot. Jacked up.
The year is 1998, and it's possibly one of the greatest years in video games in terms of how many were released that were incredibly high quality. We saw the likes of Xenogears, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Pokemon Red and Blue, at least here in the United States, GoldenEye 007, and Metal Gear Solid. If we look to computer-specific games, we saw the likes of Half-Life, Baldur's Gate, Fallout 2, and of course, StarCraft and StarCraft Brood War. They would go on to sell over 11 million copies, and that's from 2009. I couldn't find during my research any more recent data than that, so who knows what the figure is now at this point in time. But in this video, we'll be asking the question, how did Brood War do the impossible and improve upon the original StarCraft? And did it improve upon every area? This is exactly what we'll discuss as we go through the following sections. Going back to 1998, Brood War was released November 30th of that year. But even without sales data from Brood War, StarCraft was already on track to be the highest selling PC game of that year. By the end, it would end up selling over 1.5 million copies. So clearly the original StarCraft already had a great foundation, but it wasn't quite there yet to be able to spread in terms of esports and around the rest of the world to leave a lasting impression on the multiplayer scene. Before we dive fully into Brood War, during my research for the video, I discovered a really fascinating and strange connection between things. So you know what the second highest selling game was of 1998 for PC? Deer Hunter. Deer Hunter was published by WizardWorks, and what else did they publish? One of only 2 authorized add-on packs for StarCraft, that being Retribution. This was a strange time in Blizzard's history when they decided to let third parties do authorized add-on packs. There were a couple for Warcraft 2, and then there were 2 more for StarCraft, and they didn't do any more after this. Because I found this bizarre connection between WizardWorks and having published StarCraft Retribution, I wanted to see what else they did after that. So as I mentioned, they did the original Deer Hunter, and the following titles I am not making up. This is how they read. Deer Hunter 2, The Hunt Continues. Deer Hunter 3, The Legend Continues. Deer Hunter 2003, Legendary Hunting, and because of the incredible naming conventions they have going, if this company ever comes back and they want to do an additional Deer Hunter game, I have an idea, and I think it might go Deer Hunter, Legendary Deer Continues Hunting the Hunter. So there you go. Feel free to use that if you would like, although who knows, maybe somebody can put in the comments a potentially better option. Well, as you can probably tell, I went down a rabbit hole of research and just found it really interesting. It had no tie-in with StarCraft. So now, going back to StarCraft, we saw that the foundation was set for the game to become an esports legend by selling the 1.5 million copies at the end of 1998. To fully understand how, though, that it would become an esports legend with Brood War being released, we need to look at some factors outside of the game that helped lead to that success. But first, let's watch the opening cinematic and then see what Brood War did add to the base game.
Stand here. You need to see these.
I know all about the Zerg, Gerard. We've all seen the tapes 100.
You've seen nothing. Dissecting a dead Zerg in a lab is one thing. Unleashing them on men is another. You must go into this with both eyes open. Once started, there's no going back. Are you prepared to go all the way with this, Alexei?
Yes, I am prepared to go all the way, my good Admiral.
Good. Good. I knew I could count on you. Take us into orbit, Mr. Malmsteen. We've seen enough.
I'm not sure how many years it's been since I last went back to watch this, but something came to me while I was watching it, and it's the overall atmosphere of the scene. Everything has been pretty masterfully set up in this overall scene because we have the lighting and the background sound effects from the fighting and the explosions and the gunshots. Meanwhile, even the Marine's gun has a depth behind the sound where it has a weight to it when you listen. And I think the word depth is how I would describe the overall scene and how it's all being set up at this point. And I don't think, for me at least, there was anything more iconic than that ending portion where you have the battlecruiser flying away and then the slow pan away while you see a mass of Zerglings encroach on these Marines. This is all per usual for Blizzard's standards at this time, where they built some of the highest quality cinematics that anybody had seen up to this point. Even if it doesn't relay a large amount of story, it does an amazing job of setting the tone for the overall story that we will be experiencing later. Now, some of you may well be wondering, why is there not that much story in the cinematic? And well, the reason is because this game was released during the lawless time period of the 90s. A time when you were expected to read the story from a manual, and StarCraft Brood War is no different. For those that may not recall, the original StarCraft ended with Tassadar heroically sacrificing himself to defeat the Overmind in a very powerful scene. In the Ashes of Ire section within the manual, it goes over exactly that by reiterating what happened at the end of the first game, while also stating that the population of the Protoss are simply trying to recover given the devastation of the Zerg, and that the Zerg are still on the Protoss homeworld of Ire, only mindless, and they seem to be on a rampage regardless of who they come across. Then, the Emperor and his Dominion specifically calls out Arcturus Mengsk and how he took steps, or is currently taking steps, to maintain his complete power over the Terran forces. It describes how one of the ways he's doing that is by conscripting and consolidating all of the forces that used to be part of the Confederacy. In the Terminal Agenda section, it goes over a previously unknown faction, which ends up being called the UED. That is the United Earth Directorate, and they were watching everything from the entire time that the first game was happening up until now, and they are deciding to send an expeditionary force in order to stop all conflict by any means necessary. It's important to note that the UED is being led by Admiral Gerard Dugall, so in the cinematic, when they discuss going all the way, it's a reference to their secondary objective of trying to take control of the Zerg broods, which, even though their objective is to protect humanity, they aren't below using the Zerg against other humans. That doesn't sound too far different from Mengsk in the first game. If we now turn our attention to what Brood War did end up adding to the game, it didn't include any new mechanics like resources or something along those lines, but it did add a couple of new units to each of the game's factions. For example, the Zerg received the powerful Lurker unit, which is great fun to use and not so fun to be against. It's a unit that burrows underground and deals massive damage to every other ground-based unit. It not only gives the Zerg some additional defensive options, but also opens up a whole new avenue for the race to be able to contain their enemy. And this complements the Zerg perfectly because they do want to expand rapidly, so what better combination than expanding rapidly while also containing your enemy? All of that, and it still blends in perfectly with the rest of the roster and fits the overall theme. The other unit the Zerg received is a little bit more niche and obscure, and you won't see it all that often. It is the Devourer. It's a flying unit that can only attack other air units, and its primary ability is applied automatically each time it attacks. It applies acid spores that slows the enemy's attacks by a small amount, and that stacks up to 9 times. Also, for each of those stacks, the enemy unit will take 1 additional damage per attack done to it. The reason you won't see it very often is because this role of being an anti-air unit is filled by a number of the other Zerg units on the roster, and they do the job arguably better based on the situation. For example, there's Hydralisks, and they are incredibly cheap and can attack both air and ground. Meanwhile, if we look at the other air units in the roster, there's the Mutalisk, which is great in its own right and can be very fast and move around the map when needed, while at the same time, there's also the Scourge, which are another specific anti-air unit, which are very cheap and deal a large amount of damage to enemy air units. It's not that you won't ever use the Devourer, because they do have a great aesthetic, and again, I feel like they fit the theme of the Zerg race. It's only that typically you'll have better options available to deal with enemy air units. If we now move on to the Terrans, one of the units they received is the Valkyrie, another powerful air unit that is also anti-air. It fills the role of shooting a barrage of missiles in order to take down lightly armored groups of other air units. Basically a direct counter to large groups of Mutalisks. And it's not the last unit we'll see that appears to have been specifically created by the developers to counter Mutalisks, but we'll save that for when we get to it because that's on the Protoss roster. The other unit the Terrans received, it could be argued, adds more to that faction's roster compared to any other unit that was given to the others, and that is the Terran Medic. A massive boost to what the Terrans desperately needed, that being a healing capability for its biological units. But it doesn't only heal them, it does much more because it has a restoration ability that is able to remove a number of negative side effects applied to units. The final ability of the medic is a little bit more niche and you won't use it as often, but it's the optical flare, and it not only blinds the enemy unit, but it also removes their ability to detect cloaked units, so that can be helpful. Lastly, if we now go to the Protoss, the other unit that single-handedly may have made the game more balanced in multiplayer is the Corsair. This is the other unit that the developers specifically designed to be able to help counter mass Mutalisk. Before this, the Protoss really only had one option of trying to use Storm, which, while it can be powerful, is definitely not reliable. There's a few reasons that makes the Corsair such a strong addition to the Protoss roster. First, it's one of the fastest flying units in the game. And while its attack is only anti-air, they do rapid fire area of effect damage, meaning that any enemy that's grouped up tightly will all get hit at the same time. They also have an ability called Disruption Web that stops every building and unit that is stuck in that zone from attacking. This gives them some added utility beyond only being an anti-air unit. Another addition to the roster is the Dark Templar, and if you were a fan of Zeratul in the base game as I was, then this is an awesome unit. They are always cloaked and deal high damage. Not to mention their attack sounds awesome. Although this unit is not new to the game, it was in the base, it was not something that the Protoss could build, so it is a welcome addition. However, a new unit that did arise because of the Dark Templar is the Dark Archon, and that is created by combining two of those Templar. They have some extremely powerful abilities. For example, one of them is Feedback, where it drains a target's energy and then deals that amount of damage in health. Another one is Maelstrom, very powerful against biological units because it essentially stuns everybody from being able to attack or move or cast any of their other spells for a short time. And lastly, an ability that many people may remember that played the game is Mind Control. You can control any unit that is on the field. The only downside is it drains all of the shields of the Dark Archon, so you have to be very careful when you use it. But at least against the computer, this creates an awesome opportunity to be able to build another faction's buildings and units even though you selected the Protoss. Although it's not really practical when using this against humans online to take over one of their worker units and then climb all the way up the tech tree, it's still an awesome ability and adds a lot of variance and fun to the game. On the topic of units, I did find an article that was written some 20 odd years later after StarCraft Brood War was released, where some of the original developers were being interviewed. One of them, the artist Samwise, which has done incredible work for basically everything from Blizzard during these early days. For example, in the StarCraft Brood War manual, he created this beautiful artwork of a Dark Templar. But going back to the article, Samwise comments on one of the cut units that didn't make it into the original game. He says that he tried multiple times to bring in a Dark Templar Dragoon, which sounds amazing if that were to have been included in the original game, but he does go on to say that that was actually the base unit for the Stalker when we get to StarCraft 2. So ultimately, it did end up being used eventually. Something I would like to briefly speak about that Brood War did add to the game is the music, because each race received one new soundtrack, and since we're on the topic of the Protoss, why don't we start with them? Similar to the music in the base game, this new track does sound somewhat melancholy given the entire situation about the Protoss trying to recover, but when I listen to the new track, I do get a slight feeling that the artist was trying to convey some sort of sense of hope underlying this, and here's what I mean with this clip. Meanwhile, if we go over to the Zerg, their theme is definitely fitting with the new soundtrack because it still retains that creepy feeling, but at the end of the song, they do add a guitar riff that goes surprisingly hard. Now, if we go over to the Terrans, of course, again, very similar to what I mentioned for the first review video, it still sounds industrious, and at the same time though, I do feel like it gives the sense that there's people working in the background to try and create a better future. If we now move on to BattleNet in StarCraft, it is one of the major reasons why the game has had such a long-lasting legacy. In fact, why don't we just take a quick moment here to admire this screenshot of the original StarCraft BattleNet. I mean, if we look over here on the left, something that always stuck out to me are that these buttons are so thick and chunky, they feel like they have some weight to them when you would press them in. Now, because this is a screenshot, I can't actively click on them, but regardless, I really appreciate the way they look. And of course, the classic "Welcome to BattleNet" here at the top, something I feel like I have seen so many times. If we now go into the modern BattleNet, it's a little bit different as we can tell, of course, and it's laid out differently, but even at the top here, the buttons, they just don't have the same feeling to it, even though it does replicate the way that many of the other buttons in StarCraft look, which is nice in itself, but it doesn't have that same chunky feeling to it. Going back to the online multiplayer aspect of it, it's worth noting that one of the main reasons why StarCraft had such a lasting legacy is because you were able to play the online ladder or ranked games against other humans. The base game of StarCraft had this as well, but when we combine what Brood War added in terms of the new units to each of the races, all three of their rosters now felt much more filled out and balanced in order to respond to different things that other players were doing when playing against other races or even the same race. This in itself is one of the major reasons why Brood War would go on to become an esports legend. All of the races now felt more balanced, at least comparatively to the base game. With all of that said, take everything I comment on when it comes to balancing and the three races with a grain of salt, because I mentioned previously in other videos, I spent almost no time in the ranked games. I also mentioned previously that one of my personal favorite online games that I would always go to were the custom maps, but specifically a Helm's Deep custom map. But since the last review video, I did find an obscure YouTube video that somebody else has posted playing the original Helm's Deep custom map. This is a game map for whatever reason I spent many hours in because I truly loved the movies, and this just felt like a really interesting recreation of some of the scenes that did require some imagination, but it definitely gets the job done in terms of having the mass number of units, trying to defend multiple choke points, and then ultimately ending in defending the caves against the mass Urukai, or the Zerg in this case. Since we're talking about everything with Brood War and it being online, it's almost impossible to speak about the game and its esports legacy without bringing up South Korea and PC bongs. I was researching quite a bit for this video about how StarCraft became so popular in South Korea, and one of the articles I came across was really fascinating because they're from South Korea and they mentioned that in their opinion, one of the reasons is because there was a financial crisis in the late 90s in that region. They mentioned that not only was the unemployment rate high during that time, but many people were actively losing their jobs. So of course, during that kind of time period, it's very challenging for people to open up new businesses. And they give an example that many restaurants were closing specifically during this time because when money is tight, that is an industry that is typically hit hard when there's these kind of financial crises. So instead of people wanting to open up new restaurants, they instead were looking for something different, and the PC bong seemed like a great option. I learned that bong equals cafe in English, so essentially we're talking about an internet or a PC cafe. During this time period when so many businesses were closing, the PC cafe or PC bong was a much more attractive option for people to open up because it had less overhead compared to the typical restaurant. And so over the course of a few years, you saw thousands and thousands of these internet or PC cafes being opened across South Korea. And I think it's really interesting to consider that this does seem like a very plausible reason as to why StarCraft was able to take off so quickly, because all of these PC cafes are opening up and they charged a very low amount. In this article, they reference it was around 1,000 or so won per hour, which equals out to $1 or so roughly per hour. So while people are not able to work easily and they can't afford many extra items like say their own computer, what they could afford is a couple of US dollars or a few thousand won to go to an internet and PC cafe and play some of their favorite games or just new games coming out in general. And because of the overall culmination of all of this, StarCraft came out during that exact same time period and started to take off tremendously in these PC bongs where people would start to gather, not just students, but I imagine people that were out of work and they were looking for something to do during some of their downtime. There were a few other things that contributed to the overall esports scene in South Korea as well around this time period. For example, in the year 2000, the Korean Esports Association, or KESPA, was created by the Korean Industry of Culture to standardize how contracts should be managed for players and to help ensure that tournaments were held to a pretty similar standard and keep them high quality similar to other sports. The year 2000 is also when the first dedicated esports TV channel was created in that part of the country, and it's called On GameNet or OGN or GameNet. All of these various things seem to have come together and culminated in creating esports to be this phenomenon in the country, and what do you know? StarCraft had just come out not too long ago and was continuing to grow in popularity as well. This all culminated in StarCraft and Brood War becoming essentially a cultural phenomenon over there. In fact, so much so that even TV hosts from the United States, like Conan O'Brien here from his late night talk show during that time period, flew over to South Korea to visit a PC bong. I found this fascinating during my research because I had never heard about this before prior to this. And of course, what's one of the games that he's playing during his time period there? StarCraft. All various kinds of tournaments would also become popular over there. Some of them would have thousands of people that would watch, and when I'm showing some of the clips like I am here in the background, definitely get a sense of the kind of energy of people being there, and they're all just excited to watch a great game. And if that wasn't enough evidence, wait until you hear this clip where you can hear some people screaming in the background based on their favorite players. So there we go, evidence of how StarCraft players basically became stars. It would also be good to note that one of the other reasons for StarCraft becoming so popular online is because of its insanely high skill cap. So people that played the game time and time and time again could truly showcase just how great they became because the skill cap was set so high that there's always various ways you can improve either your actions per minute, which is APM, or devise new strategies and see how to counter the other opponent. So there we go, a somewhat higher level overview of why StarCraft Brood War still has tournament scenes that are going on today, and players are still competing and incredibly skilled as ever. But for now, I think it's best if we move on to the story portion of Brood War. As a quick recap, the opening cinematic and all of its beautiful atmosphere in combination with the manual gives us a lead up to the story that those two characters we were watching are Alexei and then Admiral Dougal. And they are part of the UED or United Earth Directorate, and they are trying to control the Zerg in this sector and also stop all of the fighting at any cost. Despite all of this, the game does not actually start with the Terrans or the Zerg, but with the Protoss in Brood War. And when we go to the first title card, we do learn that once again, we are Executor of the Protoss armies, which is a commander. We also learn that with the Overmind dead, the Zerg are rampaging across the planet Aiur, or the homeworld of the Protoss, without any direction and are killing everything in their path. Zeratul is here, and he suggests retreating to the last functional warp gate on their home planet of Aiur. Aldaris is also back, and he was part of the Protoss Conclave, which essentially is some sort of senate, but the other members now are all dead except Aldaris. And he does not want to retreat because he says the Protoss do not run from their enemies. And this is where I truly love the way that Zeratul was not only voiced by the actor, but the way his lines were written. I mentioned this in the previous StarCraft review, and this still remains true in Brood War. The combination of the writing itself, along with the voice actor, gives Zeratul a powerful presence.
Just as your conclave did. They are dead now, Aldaris. Dead because they allowed their pride to blind their reason. Only if we learn from their mistakes can we live to avenge them. Now, Executor, I know of a place where we can find solace. It is Shakuras, the secret homeworld of my people, the Dark Templar.
Your people. We would be seen as tyrants to them. Why would they shelter us?
Have I not pledged myself to your cause? Not all beings are as unforgiving as your lamented conclave, Aldaris.
You know, there are some powerful lines here that I feel contain exceptional lessons that can transfer over to real life. For example, that not all beings are as unforgiving as other ones are, especially about not letting pride blind your actions. What an amazing example of how a video game can share good morals with people and life lessons with those that play it. Just incredible. Going back to the story, during this exchange, we are also introduced to a new character called Artanis, and he is the newest and youngest Praetor in Protoss history, and that's another high-ranking military title. At the end of the briefing, we see none other than Jim Raynor, who offers to help us and join on our way to find the last warp gate on planet Aiur to be able to transport to the Dark Templar homeworld of Shakuras. The mission itself, once we get into it, is pretty straightforward as you might expect, given it's the first mission of this new expansion. And it fits the theme perfectly of what we just learned because we are traveling across the map, picking up all these various Protoss units, while at the same time, fighting off masses of Zerg. Once we do make our way to the end of the level, we encounter a mass of Zerg that are trying to ambush us, it almost seems like, while we're trying to make our way to the Dark Templar homeworld. It's just then that both Phoenix and Raynor arrive, and they offer to stay behind to protect the warp gate while everybody else goes through. In the next mission briefing, we learn that communication with both Raynor and Phoenix has been lost. But our primary objective is to now find the Dark Templar. In the mission, pretty early on, we get attacked by some burrowed Zerglings, and Artanis relays that the Zerg must have taken control of the warp gate, and that's why they're here. This is important and it will come up again later. But for now, after we initially start our base, we get attacked and overwhelmed by a large Zerg force, but the Dark Templar have already found us and help defeat these Zerg easily. We end up hearing that both Raynor and Phoenix are actually still alive and they are trying to retake the warp gate over on Ire, and we need to secure the gate on this side on Shakuras ASAP and destroy the Zerg on this side as well. And this is the point where, in case you forgot from the first game, this is where you'll be reminded that traveling up ramps as enormous and bulky Protoss units is quite a challenge and also leads to multiple traffic jams where everyone ends up confused. 2 hours later, once everyone did make their way up the ramp, we end up destroying the Zerg base and enjoy, in my opinion, one of the most satisfying feelings in the campaign. That is destroying the AI's fleet of overlords that go back and forth after you've destroyed the main part of the Zerg base. We then get contacted directly by Raynor and Phoenix, and it looks like the warp gates can't be shut down unless they initiate it over on Ire. So they decide to stay on the other side of the warp gate to make sure and shut it down so more Zerg don't come through. Once we move into mission briefing number 3, we're introduced to the Dark Templar matriarch Rashagal.
Zeratul has informed me of the fall of Ire, and I am deeply grieved. I am one of the few Dark Templar old enough to remember our ancestral home with clarity.
Rashagal relays that the Dark Templar found a dormant power here on Shakuras, which is why they made this their new homeworld. It's an ancient Xel'Naga temple that was discovered, and the Xel'Naga being the race that created the Protoss. To unlock the temple's true power, we learn that we need the twin crystals of Uraj and Callus that have been lost to time. One contains pure Templar energy, while the other Dark Templar energy. But before we set out to find those crystals, we must first destroy the Zerg that have taken refuge around this ancient temple. From there, when we get into the mission, it's a 2-island map with us and the Zerg being separated, and it's the first time that we're introduced to the new Protoss unit, the Corsair, and also their disruption web ability. In maps from the first game, the developers normally would give a small landing area where there aren't many defenses of the enemy AI, basically saying, hey, here's a great place to land your troops where it's not heavily defended. But here, when you go around the map, there's no area for us to ferry troops across safely because there's static defense everywhere. Given that there's no obvious landing spot, it's a great way the developers nudge the player to use this new disruption web ability that stops everybody from attacking, as was mentioned earlier in the video. From there, it's a simple matter of destroying the Zerg surrounding the temple and making sure the Dark Templar finish the Cerebrits controlling these Zerg, as the Dark Templar are the only ones that can finally kill the Cerebrits without them respawning. Before the mission is officially over, however, of all people, Kerrigan now enters the scene and says that she has some specific information about something that threatens everybody, and these Zerg were not under her control. Understandably, Zeratul and Aldaris do not trust her, but Rashagal says that we will at least hear what Kerrigan has to say. While we're in the next mission briefing, we learn from Kerrigan that she's now free from the old Overmind's grip. However, there's a new Overmind being created, and Daggith, a Cerebrit from the first game that helped Kerrigan a number of times, has created many other Cerebrits that have all merged into a new Overmind. It's still in the early stages and can't control the entire Zerg brood, however. Once it does fully mature though, Kerrigan says it will take control of her again. So Zeratul, wanting to avoid being manipulated, says attacking the Overmind is not part of our plan whatsoever and reaffirms that we must find the twin crystals. Surprisingly at this point, Kerrigan offers to join us on that search.
Then I'll help you with your search. If you can defeat the renegade Zerg gathered here, it'll weaken the efforts of Daggith and his ilk.
Of course, Zeratul and Aldaris want nothing to do with her at this point, given the entire past and everything they've witnessed from her. But Rashagal agrees and says that we need to put aside our fears and misgivings to accomplish what needs to be done. It's at least enough that we share the same agenda for now. And in a strange turn, the matriarch says that if we allow Kerrigan enough time to prove herself, she may be a valued ally, which does give the sense that the matriarch is already trusting her. But for now, we need to head to the planet Braxis and find that crystal Uraj. As we might expect, in the level itself, we do have Kerrigan helping us as a hero unit, and although she's powerful, do not do what I did and then send her against a group of Firebats and a Wraith, and then get distracted by microing Reavers. So once I reloaded and gave a lot more attention to how I controlled Kerrigan, apparently this planet used to be a Protoss outpost, but during strife between High and Dark Templars, the world and the crystal were abandoned. Over the course of the level, we do end up destroying the Terran outpost in order to allow safe passage for Kerrigan to that crystal. And after she's there, even Zeratul is now wondering if he has misjudged her. After this, while we're trying to escape and fly away from the planet, we are now officially introduced to the UED in the game, and they demand the Protoss hand over whatever they discovered on the planet. In an example of some good writing and dialogue, Artanis says how can these humans stand the might of the Protoss and that we should disregard them. After all, aren't the Protoss the ones that destroyed the Overmind? And while Zeratul agrees that the Protoss did kill the Overmind, he reminds Artanis that it would not have been possible without help from the Terrans and to not overestimate them. This isn't anything major, but it is nice to see the writers made it so that each character has their own unique perspective, especially based on their experience level. When we get inside to the gameplay, we need to destroy the generators to disrupt the UED's blockade that they've placed around the planet. This is a mission where we can't build and the focus is on microing units. It's a great way the developers show how important it is, especially as the Protoss, I believe, to try and keep units alive by rotating them as best as possible whenever their shields get low. That way, when they're in the background, they can still attack and help reinforce, but their shields can replenish while others are taking the brunt of the damage. And also, each time a generator is destroyed here, we are given some additional reinforcements to help with the following section. It's a great mechanic because as a player, we know that we need to use those new forces somehow as part of our strategy. For example, in one section, we're given some Dark Templars and part of the defenses don't have detection. In another section, we're supplied with High Templars and Storm is a great answer for dealing with ghosts that are on platforms. At the end, we rush the generator with all of our troops to destroy it, and once that happens, we've interrupted the blockade and can escape. Before we go into the next mission briefing, we are treated to an awesome title card with some great artwork that says we're returning to the planet Char. Artanis also relays that we're in orbit above the planet Char and asks if Zeratul has located the Callus Crystal. Zeratul says that yes, he remembers sensing its power before, but there's something else.
Our sensors indicate a massive, fluctuating energy signature at its location. I am, however, unable to identify the signature's source.
It turns out that other power is the new Overmind that has nested near the crystal. It's at this point as well that we can see the developers learned from their experience with the base game and tried changing the way that a mission can be approached by giving the player two completely different paths to achieve victory. We can either 1. Retrieve the crystal as Kerrigan suggests, or we can deal enough damage to the Overmind and disrupt its ability to control the broods as Artanis suggests. In terms of the gameplay itself and how the mission unfolds, it is also awesome and I really enjoyed it because we control both Protoss and a Zerg base. This goes along with the mission objective because it's nice to see how much variety the developers tried injecting into the game early on in Brood War. And here is where you will feel pretty unstoppable when you see things like Zealots, Zerglings, and Hydralisks along with Dragoons all side by side. In this playthrough, I chose to go down the left side of the map, which ultimately led to the Overmind, and because we're only doing superficial damage to it, we don't need a final blow from a Dark Templar, so once we weaken it, Artanis automatically flies in on the other side of the map to grab the Callus Crystal and says that we need to return to the Dark Templar homeworld of Shakuras. No sooner do we arrive than we learn that Aldaris has betrayed us, according to the Dark Templar matriarch. She relays that Aldaris, along with some other High Templars from the homeworld of Aiur, are staging an assault on us as we speak. Of course, Zeratul and Artanis are completely taken aback and confirm with the Dark Templar matriarch, "Are you sure that this is the case?" She reaffirms that it is, and because of that, orders us to assassinate and kill Aldaris as well as any of the other Templars that are in the way. Her reasoning is that we do not want any dissent while the Zerg are also an opponent at the same time. As usual, Zeratul, always being able to read between the lines given the kind of wisdom and intelligence they surround this character with, has the following to say after the matriarch leaves the conversation.
There's something amiss here. The matriarch has always been a wise and gentle soul. Though there is some merit in her decision, this is very unlike her.
Before we jump into the level, I encountered a really strange stuttering issue during the dialogue on my first recording. I'm pretty sure it's because I have not only an older computer, but then the way the recording software probably interacts with that could be the reason, because I've never encountered this before during all of my playthroughs that I've done in the game. But listen to this, as the way it sounds, it's quite funny when you get to the end of the character speaking.
There will be no dissent among us while the Zerg are poised to strike.
Though there is some merit in her decision, this is very unlike her.
That may well be.
Once we're inside of the level though, this has an interesting mechanic because Aldaris has taken control of all of the High Templar warriors, meaning we don't have access to not only Arbiters and then High Templars, but Archons as well. But Zeratul comes in to introduce the new Protoss unit, being the Dark Archon.
We hear you. Thoughts in chaos.
And it comes in handy pretty often during this level because the computer sends a number of high-tech units. Also a side note during this mission, so there are 3 versions of Aldaris, one of them is real, the other 2 are hallucinations. And the official strategy guide to Brood War has an interesting note in here that it wants us to attack one of the hallucinations first because it gives us good practice of using our army and the Dark Archons against the computer. Of course the guide tells us which one is the correct version of Aldaris, but I don't know, I thought it was kind of cool how they had us go the route of not the most optimal path, but something that was enjoyable and fun and also a good learning experience. Once we do get to the real version of Aldaris, we confront him and he says that he will no longer consort with us because we have been allied with the Queen of Blades and the Zerg.
Your fate was sealed the moment your matriarch allied herself with the Queen of Blades. Those of us still loyal to Aya will never be slaves to Kerrigan and her broods.
Artanis tries to convince him that Kerrigan seems to have changed for the better and that we are okay to be allying with her at least for the moment. But then Aldaris starts to reveal something that happened behind the scenes that we were not aware of. Apparently, the Dark Templar matriarch has been allying herself behind our backs more with Kerrigan than we realized.
Your matriarch has been harboring a dark secret. She has been manipulated by
I have no time for this.
What have you done?
From that point, Zeratul does not want anything more to do with Kerrigan and tells her to leave the planet. In the final mission briefing for the Protoss campaign, being Mission 8, Zeratul begins by saying that although it plays into Kerrigan's hands, we do need to use the Templar energies to destroy the Zerg Cerebrits. The matriarch goes on, describing how for too long the Dark Templar and the Protoss have sat back defenseless while everybody else and their enemies have pushed in around them, which leads to the following exchange between Rashagal and Zeratul.
Never again shall Shakuris be despoiled by the foul touch of alien species. These Zerg shall be the first to fall before us.
Matriarch, I have served you for many millennia. I have always valued your wisdom and strength. Yet, lately, in your mind, I have sensed something that clouds your true spirit. Though Kerrigan has gone, I wonder if her treachery still remains.
These recent events have weighed heavily upon me, and I am wearied. But fear not. My warrior spirit will shine before you and light your path to victory.
Indeed.
Once we're inside the level, I think this may be my favorite level of the entire Protoss campaign. Because there's a lot of complexity to it, we have 2 different bases and they are consistently attacked by Zerg pretty frequently, while at the same time we have an abundance of resources thanks to the developers giving us plenty of minerals and gas. And what we need to do is bring Artanis and Zeratul, who each have a crystal, to the Xel'Naga temple in the middle of the map, and that will trigger a 15-minute defense timer. Once we get to the temple, we have all the time and resources we could possibly ask for to build up an incredible defense. This is one of the most fun things to me about a StarCraft campaign, is when you have consistent pressure from the enemy computer, but at the same time, you have this massive defense that you know you need to set up because you're going to be attacked constantly. And once again, the strategy guide had some amazing advice for this portion, and I followed it in this level too, because we set up photon cannons at all 4 entrances to the base, sometimes 2 to 3 layers deep. We also want to have a Reaver behind those in case any Zerglings get through, and a couple of Dark Archons in the middle if we need mind control. On top of all of that, we have a roaming squadron of scouts in order to take out all the various air units we'll encounter, especially Guardians. After we defend wave after wave, everybody retreats back into the temple and we win the mission. But we then get treated to a cinematic. And now that the Zerg have been wiped off the face of Shakuras in an epic fashion with that amazing cinematic, we then can move on to the Terran campaign. The first thing we see is the opening title card that describes our ultimate mission being to capture the new Overmind. Although that's going to be our ultimate mission, our first objective is to depose of Dictator Mengsk, which is interesting, and the reasoning being we need to have our own control to be able to protect the sector. This is when we're introduced officially to Admiral Dugal. Although he was in the introductory cinematic, this is the first time that he's speaking directly to us as the player, and he has a message to remind us that we are not allowed to fail for the following reason.
Should any of you have second thoughts about performing your assigned duties, be reminded that if we fail in our mission here, not one of us will be going home. We stand or fall together in this forsaken wasteland.
We're also introduced to the other primary character of the Terran campaign, being Vice Admiral Stukov. He says that our specific orders in this mission is to assault the planet Braxis in order to access the Dominion's datanet and weapons diagnostics, so that way we can be one step closer to Mengsk. Once we get inside the mission, we learn pretty early on from one of the Marines' voice lines that we don't have any gas near us, and so we are incentivized by the developers to expand. While we're doing that, we do come across another infamous character in the Terran campaign, Lieutenant Terran. He says that he was part of the Confederacy, but him and his men are now revolting and are sworn enemies of the Confederates, so they want to join us. And as a sign of good faith, he tells us that there's a passage to the north to go to the back side of the Confederate base that we are trying to assault. Once we destroy the command center at the back of the enemy's base, we learn that the planet's primary defenses are now crippled and offline, so the UED, or United Earth Directorate, can now begin to decode the Dominion's security data link. In the next mission briefing, thanks to going through those data files, we do learn that there's a Dylarian shipyard which contains multiple battle cruisers. Our goal is to commandeer those away from Mengsk so they can be put to our purposes. After Duran gives us a tip that there will be a retaliation attempt after we take those battle cruisers, listen to the way that Admiral Dougal responds to him and also his comments about traitors. This will be very important later on.
Ah, the turncoat. I suggest that you pay keen attention to rank when you address the captain and myself, Lieutenant Duran. Is that understood?
You're beginning to show your age, Gerard. Give the boy some credit. He just tipped us off to a preeminent attack.
However useful he may prove to be, Alexei, he will always be a traitor in my eyes. And you know that I cannot abide a traitor.
Inside of the mission itself, it's a simple matter of escorting the pilots over to the battle cruisers, and although we don't have any base building, we are given a set number of units to then figure out the best way to utilize those in order to make it through the mission. It's only the second mission in the campaign, and we already have some access to nukes, which is appreciated. The mission has an interesting concept because once you save all of those battle cruisers, every single one that you're able to do that with then is part of your fleet at the end of the mission in order to defend against the retaliation attempt from the Dominion. In the next title card and mission briefing, we learn we're now over the planet of Tarsonis, which is the previous Confederate capital. We also learn that Mengsk was looking for a side disruptor, which has the ability to disrupt communication among the Zerg. Lieutenant Duran jumps in and suggests that we destroy this side disruptor, and the reasoning he gives behind it is so that it does not fall into the hands of Mengsk. Dougal initially agrees, but listen to Stukov's rebuttal and the reasoning as to why we should not destroy it, and then I would like to take a brief moment to speak about this.
But Admiral, this device could ensure our victory over the Zerg. It is foolhardy to discard such an advantage.
Surely, Vice Admiral, you don't doubt the tenacity of your own fleet.
So the exchange between these characters felt a little bit bizarre to me, I think, and it was for a couple of reasons. So in a previous mission, Dougal made it pretty clear that once you're a traitor, he always views you as a traitor, and so he has a suspicion when it comes to Duran, which is understandable given that kind of sentiment. And they don't seem to be on great terms either, because Duran even referred to him not as Admiral, and then Dougal corrected him. Meanwhile, it feels like Dougal and Stukov's relationship, while professional, they definitely seem to have some kind of camaraderie, and we just don't know how far back it goes. So going back to Duran, he mentions that the side disruptor should be destroyed because it's better that Mengsk does not have it. He also mentions that Mengsk has psi emitters, which are meant to pull the Zerg to a certain area. So immediately here in my mind, I'm thinking that why wouldn't we want to keep the side disruptor? Because if Mengsk has the ability to call the Zerg, having something to disrupt their communication would be pretty important. And in fact, Stukov mentioned something similar to this, where if we're going to try and defeat the Zerg, that could be beneficial to have that ability. This seems especially important and like a valid tactical decision, given that we know the UED, being Dougal and Stukov, have watched all of the events and how powerful the Zerg have been up to this point. So then having Duran appeal to Dougal's ego by basically saying that the fleet is so powerful, how can it possibly not defeat the Zerg? It just seemed a little bit strange to me that then we have Dougal immediately go with Duran's decision instead of taking into account Stukov's. And I guess, well, why am I even focusing on this so much if I were to ask that question? Well, it's probably because the quality of the writing has been so incredibly high all the way up to this point. I have not questioned a single choice made by the authors up until some of this dialogue here, and it's by no means bad or anything like that. It's only that I think it shows a sign that the game was rushed, and we do know that Brood War was notorious for having a crazy crunch cycle, and so this could have been something that when it was normally ironed out possibly in the first game, if there was dialogue like this, there wasn't a chance or time to do it here in Brood War. But once we make our way inside of the mission itself, our objective is to locate the side disruptor and then have it destroyed. And the mission itself with the gameplay is great because we're facing off against 4 different Zerg broods, but we can neutralize the brood if we destroy the hive, meaning that we need to focus our attention and forces on each of the individual hives that then stops all of the other Zerg that are part of that brood from attacking us. This is another interesting and nice mechanic that the developers added in to try and change up the gameplay, and I definitely appreciated it because it makes it a fun different way to approach the mission. The way the map complements the Terran also is nice because we go through little by little expanding our reach by moving siege tanks up and then also expanding with bunkers and missile turrets. So all in all, this was another great mission that I enjoyed going through. But interestingly, as we get to the end of the mission and move Duran next to the side disruptor, some other ghosts come in and say that he's relieved of his duty because we're going to disassemble the side disruptor according to Stukov's orders. The next mission and briefing is pretty simple because all it boils down to is we need to either cripple Mengsk's ability to use battlecruisers or his ability to create nukes. This mission has an interesting concept, and I think it's fascinating because it's the first time in StarCraft where the developers gave us a choice that for the next mission, do we prefer to face nukes or battlecruisers? The way we choose is pretty simple. All we do is destroy one base or the other on this map. Something else that some may find interesting is an Easter egg on this map where if you explore around, you find a specific area where there's one of these pits from the Star Wars movies. And I think it's called a Sarlacc pit or something like that, but it's in Return of the Jedi and you can find it here on the map as a nice Easter egg. Back to the gameplay itself though, I would always prefer if given a choice to not face against nukes. For whatever reason, I am just not a fan of having that done to my bases. So I chose to take out the base that had the nuclear silos, and it came to me, of course, during the playthrough that what better way to take out the final silo than doing this.
I hear that. Never know what hit 'em.
Nuclear launch detected.
We won't need to worry about nukes when we siege Mengsk Pass.
Going into the next mission briefing, it may be one of the shortest in the entire game because all we need to do is defeat Mengsk, and that's what the briefing comes down to. So once we're in the mission, I know that I said I prefer battlecruisers compared to my base being nuked, but I did start to question that during this mission because it's not just a couple of battlecruisers. But over the course of the entire mission, it was probably 30 plus or so battlecruisers in total. At any one time, it would be between 1 and sometimes 2 or 3, but definitely a good challenge, and this level made for quite a lot of defense that needed to be placed. Something that did genuinely surprise me in the last couple of missions is in the official strategy guide, the author says to always keep a medic near your siege tank, even though that's a mechanical unit and the medic cannot heal it. At first, this sounds like it would be the worst tactical advice that you can have until you realize it's actually genius, because when you face off against a Terran computer in StarCraft Brood War, they are obsessed with using the lockdown ability with their ghosts on all of your mech units. As we made our way through the mission, I felt like there was only one way to ultimately defeat Mengsk. Since he was using battlecruisers against us the entire mission, I might as well mass an entire large grouping of battlecruisers myself and then send that against his base. Once we make our way over to Mengsk's command center and destroy it, then he himself appears at the end of the mission, and Admiral Dugal says that he will be publicly executed along with his ranking officers for everything he's done. But at the last minute, of all people we would expect, Raynor comes in along with some Protoss units and says that he's here to save Mengsk because a mutual acquaintance wants him alive. Then the dimensional recall ability is used and all of them teleport away from Dugal and the UED fleet. In the following mission briefing, we learned that both Raynor and Mengsk are now being held inside of a Protoss encampment. And of course, it's our job to try and break through to them. However, there are also some Zerg in the surrounding area that we need to be aware of. Once we go into the mission, we did find out about the medic pretty early on in the Terran campaign, and it is now time for the other new Terran unit to be introduced, the Valkyrie. And it's an interesting way that they introduced this unit because at the beginning, there is a Zerg base, and the Valkyries fly in to destroy the Mutalisks. However, we don't have control over them, we just have to watch. But I did find there was a variation in the number of Valkyries that survived this fight. You start with 6, and sometimes I found that I only had 4 left over this automatic fight that plays out, and other times I had 5. I think it's actually interesting that you don't always have a guaranteed number of Valkyries, and that adds a little bit of flavor and variability to the mission, which although it's nothing crazy, but it does make it more interesting overall. I think the only way I would slightly change the beginning and how it plays out is to give the player control of the units from the beginning after the fight starts, so that way if you have a newer player that's trying to understand the mechanics, they can simply watch and then learn. However, somebody that already understands the game pretty well and the new units can automatically start microing the units back to save them so they don't die. This was another mission that I enjoyed, which you'll hear me say that quite often about the Brood War missions themselves, because the developers learned a tremendous amount from the first game, and you can tell that they really did try to apply different mechanics, and they gave you options to face off against different races in different scenarios and situations. So in this case, playing against both the Zerg and the Protoss added quite a bit of different tactics that you need to consider when defending and also attacking. Once we get to the end of the mission and Stukov has Raynor and Mengsk cornered only by a warp gate where they might try to escape, but before we're able to do anything, Stukov receives an incoming message that there are many Zerg in the northeastern area on their way towards us. That's where Lieutenant Terran is supposed to be, but apparently he's moved his forces so there's no one defending us against the Zerg in that quadrant. And surprise, surprise, now we seem to have a betrayal by Lieutenant Terran who's not following orders, but instead moved his troops purposefully out of the way so the Zerg could come right towards us.
I'm giving you a direct order to return to your position and reinforce my troops.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but it seems your signal's fading out. I couldn't make out that last part. I'll try to re-establish contact later.
Once we go into the next mission briefing, it is another strange situation in terms of storytelling where Stukov is nowhere to be found, and instead of Stukov coming back to explain the situation and what happened with Duran, Stukov left Aiur and then went to the planet Braxis instead, so he's not part of this briefing. Because of that, then Lieutenant Duran says that Stukov is basically a traitor himself, and Dugal says at first that him and Stukov have been friends for longer than Duran has been alive, and yet still ultimately orders Duran to kill Stukov. I think this is again another consequence of the crunch time that happened and the fact that the Terran campaign only has 8 missions, where perhaps if there were 10, then it would have more of a chance to tell the story behind some of these actions instead of making it seem somewhat forced that there's this betrayal and Stukov needs to die. Perhaps we could make it so Admiral Dugal had a lot more paranoia behind the scenes that we could display and show, and then we could understand this kind of reasoning. But as it is, at least to me as I'm going through this, it did seem more like this is a forcing of events just because the story needed to be told this way, compared to it being more plausible. Because ultimately, I feel like all of this could be resolved if Stukov and Dugal simply had a small discussion and spoke before all of this unfolded. Once we go into the gameplay itself, it is a maze level, but it honestly is one of the easier ones that I found, purely because we have the medic and the healing ability is very powerful as we make our way through. There is a cool set piece though as we continue throughout the level, where a large number of Zerglings are held behind a door, and we have a hallway that's lined with multiple turrets. So if we send a single Marine over to activate the door to let all of the Zerg through and then run back, instead of having our units face off against the Zerg, the turrets do all the work for us. It's not necessary at all, but again, it's a cool set piece to see and something that changes up the maze gameplay of the rest of the level. And no surprise here, but of course, Lieutenant Duran does eventually find Stukov and then shoots him, and while he's dying, Stukov relays to Dugal that the ultimate traitor is Duran, and the reason that Duran wanted to come here was to destroy the side disruptor because he's on the side of the Zerg. But as we suspect, Dugal realizes all of this much too late, and then Stukov dies, and it's now our mission to stop the side disruptor from melting because Duran is trying to explode the facility. Once we make our way and get to the end of the level, we do actually find the reactor core and are able to stop it from melting down, and Dugal orders it protected at all costs so we can use it if we need it. In the briefing for the final mission of the Terran campaign, we learned that Dougal did end up using the Psi Disruptor, and we are now at the planet Char, and most of the Zerg are not capable of fighting back against us because of the Psi Disruptor. However, our goal is still here to capture the Overmind in order to try and use it for our purposes. We'll do that by sending medics to it to pacify it. In the level itself, it is very fitting for the final mission of a campaign because it's completely unlike anything that we've seen up to this point throughout both the first game and also StarCraft Brood War, where we're facing against multiple Zerg broods, which of course that's the same, but there's a catch. All of the structures are invulnerable until we destroy the Zerg Cerebrit that controls that specific brood. And because our base is surrounded by sunken colonies that are invulnerable, we're incentivized to first build up a powerful air force to assault that specific Cerebrit that controls all of those buildings. Once we do that, we can focus our efforts on the second Cerebrit that controls a primarily powerful air force, so then we want to use a ground assault against that one. This is a mission where we are introduced to a Zerg hero unit though, called Torask. Huh. Well, I mean, it can't be anything too crazy, right?
Base is under attack.
This unit is insanely powerful because it's a hero Ultralisk, and it respawns every so often until you destroy the Zerg Cerebrit that's on the right-hand side of the map, and it constantly harasses you and becomes more and more powerful as the game goes on by having higher upgrades. There was a tactic I learned about in this mission that I've never done before, so I decided to try it, which is going around the entire left-hand side of the map, all the way to the north, and then up and around to the Overmind, and using mini dropships for a mass drop of all of my units right on top of the Zerg base. So from here, it was a simple matter of moving the medics onto the spaces around the Overmind to pacify it. Once we do that, Kerrigan arrives at the end of the level to reveal herself to Dougal and the UED, stating that she's the ultimate mastermind behind everything, and that the Psi Disruptor won't last forever, and soon she'll have full control of all of the Zerg. And that is essentially the end of the Terran campaign, but we then get treated to another cinematic.
Zerg! The very mention of this terrifying race once brought fear to all who heard it. But now we can all rest easy as our own forces now occupy their very homeworld of Char. Months have passed since our initial confrontation with the Zerg, and now Directorate forces have taken control of the planet Char, long since rumored to cradle the malevolent Overmind of the Zerg. The Overmind itself, an enormous living brain-like entity, dictates control of all the myriad Zerg forces, and it was believed to be planning an invasion of the Earth itself. Once on the offensive, our highly trained Directorate forces were more than a match for the beast-like Zerg. Even their fiercest warrior breed could not defeat the greatest military technology in the galaxy.
As you might be able to tell, there is quite a bit less story-wise that's being relayed here compared to the end of the Protoss campaign, and this is a lot more about showing a nice-looking cinematic and quite a bit of parody that's done between Starship Troopers, which clearly I'm sure the creators of StarCraft must have been big fans of, because there's quite a few similarities that you can see between different screens and even the speaking style. All of this leads us now into the final campaign for StarCraft Brood War, and that is the Zerg. We begin by learning that Phoenix and Raynor have been enlisted by Kerrigan to help stop the UED from controlling the Zerg in this sector, which means we can assume that previously when Raynor and Phoenix had helped save Mengsk, that was Kerrigan's request. Before additional information can be relayed, Terran comes in to say that the Psi Disruptor has reached all the way over here to the planet that Kerrigan is on, and her forces are fighting each other, so our goal is to stop that from happening as much as possible. The gameplay of the level itself is somewhat interesting because we don't have any resources, but we are given specific units to protect different Zerg hives, because of course they are under attack from other Zerg units. And every single time that we protect one of these Zerg hives, we receive some kind of additional units that'll help us protect the following one. Outside of that, nothing too crazy. We are given some high-tech units like a queen that can use spawn broodlings, but otherwise we get to the end of the level, protect the final hive, and then we win the mission. In the following mission briefing, we discover the true reason why Kerrigan wanted Manx to be rescued, and it's because she wants his psi emitters. She explains that with enough psi emitters from Manx, she can gather enough forces of the Zerg to be able to assault and destroy the psi disruptor that the UED has under their control. In return, she's going to offer Manx control of the planet Korhal so he can re-establish his role as Emperor. Going into the level though, we do start with an SCV and we need to gather some Zerg that are grouped around us using a psi emitter. It's an interesting touch because we do get a handful of Zerg hero units, and as we build up our bases, one of the most important ones is Torask. The returning unit from the end of the Terran campaign is now on our side and is just as powerful now as it was then, and all we need to do is gather up enough forces to assault the Terran base, and Torask of course is going to be a frontline unit, incredibly tanky and powerful with high hitting damage, so it is somewhat easy and we end up destroying the psi disruptor. In the following mission briefing, Kerrigan says that before she can fully assault the UED, she first needs some more resources for her army, and she enlists Raynor, Phoenix, and Mengsk to help her. Of course, Raynor and Phoenix don't trust her whatsoever, and then even at the end of the briefing, Kerrigan says that understandably, they are siding with the evil that they know compared to the evil they don't. It's only that they don't understand fully what this will cost them. But regardless, we need to go get those resources right now. The gameplay of the mission itself has some interesting quirks to it that is especially dependent on the way the Zerg would like to play. So although we are able to mass a large number of units, which definitely feels like the Zerg because you have mass armies, but everything in the level is pretty much hemmed in by these different corridors, or canyons. Because of that, we can't have a large army all going together. Instead, it's more single file, which in a way, I guess is kind of true to the way that StarCraft and Brood War have their pathing. But regardless, it does make the level interesting, and on top of that, our goal is to get 10,000 minerals. But we could also do an optional victory of infesting all 5 Terran command centers. And because I'd never previously infested Terran command centers, I just always went through and destroyed everything in my previous playthroughs, I decided why not capture 4 out of the 5 Terran command centers, and then still get the 10,000 resources to see how that unfolded in the following mission, because they made it clear that that would somehow help us in the next mission. And something I found nice, in the previous StarCraft, you didn't get almost any opportunities. I think it was only 1 opportunity to use infested Terrans. And here we already have a great time using them, so I definitely tried. It's still difficult because they're sort of a wonky unit to use, but it was still a good time nonetheless being able to use them this early on in the campaign of the Zerg. Going to the next mission briefing, we're back at the planet Braxis, which is the primary stronghold of the UED, and Kerrigan just says that the primary goal is to assault and destroy everything that we can. But there is an interesting twist, and once we go into the mission, we do discover that we're not only facing against the Terran themselves, but because they control the Overmind, we also are fighting Zerg. And as a great touch, we get to see what infesting the Terran command centers in the previous level gives us. We have 4 command centers that are infested, and we can immediately start building infested Terrans if we want to. Not only all of that, but we also have the 10,000 minerals from the previous mission too. And at this point, I did feel like this is one of the highlights of the entire Brood War campaign, because we can truly unleash the full fury and power of the Swarm. We have an incredibly wide open map in this case, plenty of minerals, plenty of places to expand to. The only downside and thing that hampers it is part of the engine limitation of StarCraft, which means you can only grab 12 units at a time. So there can be moments where it feels a little bit tedious to consistently grab and group all of the units, to always be ordering them to attack in the right area, and to make sure and follow through. But overall, honestly, this is an epic level, and the developers did a great job building this. And once you go through base after base, you get to the final Terran stronghold, which is also itself pretty formidable. And once you destroy the entire base, which, keep in mind, given the time frame this game came out, 1998, you do need to destroy every last structure. It's not enough that you simply destroy the majority. It needs to be every single one. Then, true to the deal, Kerrigan gives the planet back to Mengsk. After all of that is said and done, as almost everybody expected, Kerrigan's time to betray everyone is now at hand. And the trick to this level is that we have both a Protoss and a Terran base that are both heavily defended, and we need to kill General Duke and also Phoenix. But we have 6 minutes to attack either of the bases or some combination of both before they start building additional units and also all of their structures become active. So in terms of gameplay, once again, this is a totally different change than anything we've seen before, and it allows for a lot of variability in the way that you try and approach it, depending on which base you would prefer to destroy or which one you would like to keep alive. I tried to take out as many of the Terran structures as I could in the base to the left, and then also the second Terran base. And before going fully down into the third, I did do that some, but I also decided it would be best to take out as many of the Protoss units in their initial base or two as I could, and that actually worked out so well in my case that I didn't have any resistance pretty much throughout the first, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes of the match. And same as the previous mission, this is another level where you do truly feel like the Swarm, because once you build up your bases and resources, you can easily mass to a max population, and then just overwhelm the enemy. So in my case, I went to the Terran base first, and then you destroy Duke, and then once you take him out, you can then move on to the Protoss, and you ultimately need to face off against Phoenix. And something that's interesting is when the game was developed, they didn't make Phoenix invulnerable to using the spawn brutaling ability. So if you wanted to, you could instantly kill him despite being a powerful hero unit with the Queen's ability. Despite that, I did decide to give Phoenix a full warrior's death and honorably fought him with my army. Of course, once that is done and takes place, Raynor is incredibly upset given what just happened, and vows to kill Kerrigan if he sees her again. It's really interesting to see the path they decided to take with the storytelling in Brood War, where Kerrigan is becoming more and more unredeemable as time goes on, and they're setting up a lot of antagonism between her and Raynor, compared to the previous game where I felt like they were trying to create a sort of connection that they still had, despite everything that was happening. When going to the next mission briefing, we learn that there's no time to rest because Kerrigan and Duran say that the UED with the Overmind are sending a massive amount of Zerg to attack Kerrigan. Once we're in the level, it's another pretty amazing setup that the developers did, and you can continue to see how they hone their skills and they're trying out different things to see what sounds fun and makes things interesting. So we start out with the 4 bases, but they pretty much immediately come under assault by a mass amount of the Renegade Zerg under the Overmind's control. So then we're left with only a central base, and we need to re-expand out to those other bases if we want to win the mission. On the one hand, while the storytelling seems to be taking a bit of a back seat compared to some of the previous story entries with the first StarCraft, more than ever, the map makers and the designers truly are honing their skills and making the levels themselves more interesting than I think I've ever seen previously. Once we continue expanding, we push our way west across the left-hand side of the map, and first go through a couple of the Zerg bases, and then after that, we assault the primary UED base. Once we get there, it's one of the few times we don't need to destroy the base fully, but focus on the scientists that are within. And the reason is, if we can destroy these scientists, then it hampers the UED's ability to research the Overmind and the Zerg further. Kerrigan's next goal is to capture the Dark Templar matriarch Rashagal, but she says in order to do that, we need some kind of a distraction, and Duran says that if we destroy an outpost of the Protoss with an explosion, that will allow us to capture the Dark Templar matriarch. In the gameplay of the mission, it is one of the more challenging ones because I found that the Protoss attack you pretty early on, and it's not only with Zealots and Dragoons, but they also use Dark Templars, and since Protoss are notoriously strong with their ground units, there were a couple of close calls where I almost lost my bases, surprisingly. Another factor that makes this challenging once you're done defending and decide to go on the assault, whenever you face Dark Templar Archons, they will never fail to mind control any overlords that you bring. And I made that mistake on one of my first assaults where I only brought one overlord and they mind controlled it, and that is a genius strategy because then I could not see their Dark Templars. So note to anyone going through this, bring more than one overlord on any assault that you do. Once we had a sizable force, from there we pretty much steamrolled across the map in normal Zerg fashion, overwhelming numbers taking out base after base, which leads to the destruction of the outpost, and Kerrigan says that she is going to go capture the matriarch as was planned, although we don't see it happen. After this, when we go to the next mission briefing, we learn why Kerrigan wanted the matriarch. It was to use the matriarch as collateral to get Zeratul to kill the Overmind. Once we go inside of the level, this was probably the most challenging level I faced in the entire campaign, and I think it's for a few different reasons. The first one being that not only are we facing both Zerg and Terran, and each of those factions has full access to their entire roster, but both of the armies upgrade their units somewhat early on. So if you wait too long, you're not only going to face maxed out Zerg, but you're also going to face maxed battle cruisers. So this level took me around an hour and 15 minutes. And granted, I'm not the most skilled player, so that was definitely part of the reason why. I tend to prefer and take my time and slowly build up. But this is one of those levels where if you do that, I think it only makes it more difficult. Once we're at the end and defeat the Overmind, Kerrigan comes over with the matriarch as agreed, and when asking the matriarch if she would like to go back with Zeratul and the Protoss, Rashagal says the following.
No, my queen. I wish only to serve you and remain at your side.
What treachery is this, Kerrigan? This pathetic creature cannot possibly be Rashagal.
I promised that I'd allow her to return to you, Zeratul, but it looks to me like she doesn't want to go.
It's now that Kerrigan reveals, long before we went to the Dark Templar homeworld of Shakuras and met Rashagal, Kerrigan was there already and had corrupted the Dark Templar matriarch's mind. She was able to do this because Rashagal underestimated Kerrigan's power and somehow became mind-controlled through that process. What I find most interesting about this is there is some really well done writing that if we go back to the very beginning of the campaign with the Protoss, there are some hints the matriarch gives that she already has been corrupted.
The example set by your fallen hero, Tassadar, has shown you that when the light and dark sides of our energies are united, our power is undeniable.
It's subtle things like this that I don't know if they were purposeful, but I believe they were, which that is really well done writing, because then you're giving tips at the very beginning of the campaign and the payoff is towards the end. But after all of this exchange, the Dark Templar matriarch does end up going with Zeratul, and that's the end of this mission. In the next mission briefing, I found a strange discrepancy between what's being shared and what we just saw at the end of the last mission. So Duran says that Zeratul was able to sneak in under our defenses and then steal away the Dark Templar matriarch from beneath us. But what's strange is at the end of the last mission, we clearly see Zeratul walking over to the Dark Templar matriarch, and then she goes with them when they do their mass recall. So I guess even though Zeratul did that in front of them, maybe they didn't necessarily notice, but regardless, that doesn't make a difference. Our goal now is to go and capture the Dark Templar matriarch back. Inside of the mission, we do see that there's a time limit that we need to adhere to and beat the mission within 30 minutes of game time. If we complete the level with at least 5 minutes remaining on the timer, then we do unlock a secret mission. And the Protoss base itself is pretty formidable, so you do want to build up a large army as quickly as possible. Once we do get to the stasis chamber holding Rashagal, Zeratul is already there and the following exchange unfolds.
Thank you, Zeratul. Into your hands I give the future.
I can hardly believe this. You've killed your own matriarch.
Better that I killed her than let her live as your slave, Kerrigan.
Some of the dialogue here that they give Kerrigan regarding that she mentioned, "I can't believe what you did, Zeratul, to the matriarch, ha ha ha," and then going into leaning heavily on how much enjoyment she gets out of having revenge on Zeratul. It seemed like it was changing not only from her being unredeemable, but leaning more into a sadistic side, which it got to a point where I almost felt, okay, you know, I get it, she definitely is being portrayed as evil. And so I think they're going a little bit too heavy on that whole evil, unredeemable aspect. And once we do get to the end of the story, there is some evidence I found in an interview with one of the authors that it does seem like they may even have the same sentiment. But now that we've unlocked the secret mission, Zeratul is on his way trying to find Artanis, and while doing that, some Protoss signatures are located on a world where Zeratul says that there shouldn't be any Protoss signatures. He finds that strange, but thinks that it could be Artanis, so it's our duty to go down to this planet and find out what's going on. And the mission itself is called Dark Origin, and it has its own special title card that was created for it. And look at this beautiful artwork. We have Zeratul standing here in the snow, and we also see some trees on the right-hand side. Off in the distance on the left, we see that there could be a combination of Protoss structures and maybe some Terran structures. It's hard to make it out. And then in the background, we have some mountains as well. All of this comes together, and it is a beautiful piece of artwork with a ton of atmosphere. Once we're in the gameplay, the mission itself is all about one ability, that being mind control. We have minimal forces and we can't build anything else, but we have Dark Archons, and so we need to go throughout the map mind controlling as many Terran units as possible. But while we do that, we do see a stasis cell. And as Zeratul approaches it, it appears that a Protoss is in the stasis cell, and some kind of research is being done on this Protoss's psychic emanations. When we continue on, there's another stasis cell, and as Zeratul approaches it, there's a message that a Zergling is in the tank. And the computer says there's gene splicing that's taking place between both the Protoss and the Zerg test subjects. When we continue on to the last part of the level and have Zeratul approach the final stasis cell, the following exchange happens.
I've never seen a creature like this before.
Test subject 29 classified. Protoss Zerg hybrid, imperfect cryohibernation. Psionic emanations minimal.
No. Magnificent, isn't it? What? Who are you?
I've had many names throughout the millennia, young prodigal. You would know me best as Samir Quran.
Kerrigan's consort. Is this part of her twisted schemes?
No. Young Kerrigan could not have engineered this grand experiment.
If you are not her pawn, then what are you?
I am a servant of a far greater power. A power that has slept for countless ages, and is reflected in the creature within that cell. This creature is the completion of a cycle. Its role in the cosmic order was preordained when the stars were young. Behold the culmination of your history.
All I behold is an abomination.
Well, as you can imagine, the implications of this is pretty insane for the StarCraft lore and the universe of this world. So we've essentially been introduced to a far greater power, but that will not come into play until StarCraft 2. So for now, we go to the final mission of the entire Brood War campaign. In this last mission briefing, we find ourselves back on Char, and it looks like there's 3 different fleets that are against Kerrigan now. We have Artanis, Arcturus, and also the UED under Admiral Dougal. And the entire briefing just comes down to everybody wants to take out Kerrigan. So when we get into the mission, we find ourselves on a central platform and facing 3 different armies. They all have their different specialties, so it really depends on your preference of how you would like to approach it. But I decided to look at this as how would Kerrigan be most likely to approach it, and it came to me that she'd probably go after Mengsk first in order to show him that he's the weakest, and that would bruise his ego, so I'm sure that's what she would do. And honestly, when I went to execute the plan, it was a little bit easier than I thought it would be because I massed some air units and then was able to take out Mengsk's base from there. After that, I thought Kerrigan would go after Dougal and the UED fleet second, and so that's exactly what I did, using a mass number of ground troops while also Defilers and the Dark Swarm ability to protect them against all of the battle cruisers. That worked out tremendously well, and my thought was Kerrigan would do this because they were meddling in affairs and they shouldn't be here in the first place, so that's why I went for them second. And then last but not least, the Protoss third, because it came to me that Kerrigan would probably want to assault them last, given the Protoss and the Zerg are ancient enemies. Once we go through and defeat the last Protoss base, that takes us to the final cinematic of the entire campaign.
Once again, I stand atop the broken bodies of my enemies. Victorious, but not unscarred. The Earthborn Directorate has been destroyed, and the Overmind lies dead and trampled beneath the ashes of Char. As for my unlikely allies, I think that I shall allow them a reprieve. For in time I will seek to test their resolve and their strengths. They will all be mine in the end. For I am the Queen of Blades. None shall ever dispute my rule again.
Well, here at the end, it goes on to have a couple of title cards that say the UED's fleet was destroyed. Arcturus Mengsk, on the other hand, had his entire fleet basically crippled and he's trying to rebuild. Meanwhile, the Protoss are doing the same, going back to the planet Shakuras and trying to rebuild their civilization. And on the final title card, it's about Kerrigan stating that although she's won all of these minor victories, there's a feeling she has that something greater is looming in the horizon. Now, I did mention before that I found an article where the developers were speaking about the story of Brood War, and one of the writers actually specifically calls out that at the time they wrote Brood War, they just didn't have it in their mind at all about villains that had redemption arcs. And they said that after writing Brood War, they fell in love with that eventually in order to tell better stories, and in fact it wouldn't come into play more until Warcraft 3 and beyond. I think that's a really honest statement, and it just shows that at the time of writing Brood War, the writer didn't have the full skill set that they do now, and it just shows that they were growing and they still were learning and they were able to take their experience of writing in Brood War and then improve upon things with future iterations. Next, for one of the final topics, I would like to take just a couple of brief minutes to discuss the official strategy guide for StarCraft Brood War. It is something I have had for many years at this point because I initially got it when the game was released, and I've definitely looked at it and looked through it more times than I can count. Of course, it describes everything on the units, and a lot of that is a rehash from the initial first strategy guide for the base game. But as you might expect, it goes through some of the new units. And then after that, there's a small section that describes some general tips and strategies that you can use when you're playing as a certain race. You know, some of the weaknesses and strengths of it. But then it also gives some specific advice as to how you can try and approach when you face against other races, and also the things you should be on the lookout for. But if we go past that, one of the main reasons that people, for the most part, get strategy guides is, of course, to be able to complete the campaign and go with the walkthrough. I'm now going to switch over to the PDF version because I think it makes it a little bit easier to illustrate what it is I would like to point out on this next section. So in the walkthrough, they did quite a bit more compared to the first base game and its strategy guide. Previously, they used to only mark certain major events on the map, and then they would put where you start, but they wouldn't really mark a lot else. So here's an example. It's Mission 3, Ruins of Tarsonis for the Terrans. And right here at the bottom, we can see there's plenty of minerals and Vespines listed with M and V. There's A here, there's a number 2, there's a number 3 up here, and then there's also the letter B. All these different sections the author is going to refer to when giving us different directions for the strategy. Very helpful to have it all labeled. And like I said, they didn't do this before in the previous strategy guide of marking where minerals and Vespine were on the map. Super helpful as you're going throughout the levels. If I continue on to the next couple of pages, of course, we still have quite a bit of text of describing how to do things, and some screenshots, which is always helpful, and I appreciate that. It can give some extra advice and make it even easier to describe things in some cases. But as I continue on, you can see here that also Assault on Core Hall Mission 4, everything is labeled on the right here so easily. We start in the middle, and then it has all the arrows as to where we go for different bases. Just very well laid out and made it quite a bit easier than even the first strategy guide. One thing I would like to point out is the actual strategies here, or as they call it, the battle strategy. It was tremendously helpful because I did a series where I followed the StarCraft and the StarCraft Brood War strategy guides, and I couldn't use anything outside of it because I set a challenge for myself. And I have to say that I was very pleasantly surprised with the strategies within, because not one of them made it so I couldn't complete the campaign. Don't get me wrong, some of them made it, I think, a little bit more challenging than they needed to be, but overall, when I was reading through this, It did have some great advice, and I think the author did a great job working with the developers to try and figure out the great strategies that could overall beat the mission, but also give you the different usage of units and their abilities. So overall, I think they took all of that into consideration when they were trying to figure out the best way to describe the strategies and how to complete these missions. And if anyone else was interested, it was a great time going through and using this guide. It almost is like you're playing the game as though it's back in 1998. The strategies came straight from the author and the developers as to the way they thought the game could be easiest to complete. So right now with the PDF version, this is free and it is online. It's on Internet Archive, so if anyone is interested, I would suggest looking it up because it definitely is easy to find if you put it in a Google search. Well, so now would be a good time to go over some final thoughts. And overall, StarCraft Brood War is undoubtedly an incredible game. So many factors all came together to create Brood War and make it a lasting legacy. Everything from what the developers introduced in terms of the gameplay and the mechanics of the 3 races and adding all of the new units. There was some amazing balance that was introduced to the game that wasn't there before in the original, and that helped create a lasting legacy for the tournament scene and allowed people to even be able to play it up to this day and still discover new strategies. Although the story isn't the same high quality as the base game, it still has its high points and it introduced a tremendous amount of information and lore to the world and universe of StarCraft. We can also tell the developers took countless lessons from the base game when creating the campaign and the gameplay flow and all of the mechanics, as well as changing up variety in the levels themselves. And I would say that for anyone curious about the campaign, you can still go back and enjoy it even to this day. So thank you to everyone that took part in creating this game, because I have enjoyed it for many years and I'm sure that will continue. And as always, I'd like to say I sincerely appreciate all of you for watching this video. It means a lot because I had a great time going through this entire experience. Feel free to leave any comments down below about your experience with the game or any history you've had with it, because I do go through and I read all of that and I appreciate it. It's nice to see. And the same goes for if you have any suggestions for future videos. I would appreciate any feedback on that. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day to all of you, wherever you are in the world.